Kia ora koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai, haere mai, piki mai ki tēnei hui. Kia ora everybody, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for our panel kōrero on our Homes for All plan, which I'm really, really proud of. Kia ora, I'm Marama Davidson. I am the Green Party co-leader and Member of Parliament. I'm also our spokesperson for housing. I launched our Homes for All plan Sunday just gone here in Manurewa, in fact, in the middle of a community housing neighbourhood where more people are given and supported with an opportunity to own a home. People who may not have had an opportunity to own a good home, a good quality home that is affordable. And it was a real privilege to stand in the middle of that community on Sunday and launch our comprehensive plan to think about housing in a whole different way. And it starts off with our understanding that absolutely everyone has the right to decent housing, that the well-being of people and whānau and communities starts with having a warm, dry, affordable place to live where you are not worried and stressed about being moved on all the time, where people can put down roots in their neighbourhood and form connections and relationships and support networks, and people feel in control of their lives and hopeful about their future and their whānau future. So tonight is a chance to talk about our Homes for All plan, and we have got a couple of important panelists also to add to the discussion, and from lived experience, people who are also working on this kaupapa of making sure that people have got a good place to live. So I'm just going to start us off right now with a karakia. Kia ora koutou. Kia tau te rangi Mārie, o te rangi e tū nei, o papatua nuku e takoto nei, o te taiao e awhi nei ki runga i a tātou, ti hei mauri ora. May the peace of the sky above, of the earth below, and the world all around rest upon us. Kia ora koutou katoa. I probably should just add that I am very privileged to be sitting in a good home right now. And I'm in my home here in Manurewa, in my bedroom, in fact, which I'm very grateful to have, and, you know, hosting this webinar for us tonight. So thank you. So what's going to happen? I'm just going to give some further introductory kōrero, and then we will start bringing our panelists on as well. So just to set the scene for our kaupapa, tonight I'm really looking forward to talking about putting down roots and accessing, making sure that people can access secure housing. We know that people just want a warm, safe, affordable place to live with some stability. We know that problems for a long, long time, problems with sort of investors and speculators have been able to own the property market, so to speak, and that has sent rents and housing costs up really high, and that has meant that a lot of people have struggled with high housing costs, whether you rent or own. So we know, and the Greens believe, that we need to transform the way we treat housing to being a fundamental human right, a public and core community good. And we need to think of houses and building communities as the fundamental building block to everything that we need to address in our country. So our plan tonight talks about making sure, and ways for making sure that our homes are affordable and accessible. And it talks about solutions like creating a non-profit rental sector. And I've seen some really good stuff from overseas for example, where councils play a strong role in creating housing apartments and housing blocks that are beautiful, that are good quality, that the people living in feel really good about living in them, that have good public spaces and green spaces and recreation spaces as part of their design. So a non-profit rental sector would be, as part of the way of making sure that people are able to access affordable, good quality rentals. And it sort of brings the power away from just relying on the private market as well. We have, one of the things I'm most proud of in our plan is that we will commit to clearing the public housing, the social housing waiting list in 5 years. And the main sort of thrust of that is allowing for kāinga order, or the sort of state housing agency, to be able to spend more money and invest more into ramping up the supply of public housing. We think that there's, this is probably one of the most important things that we can spend our collective resources on, is making sure we've got enough public and community housing. Really also, so we're committing to getting that waiting list down, that waiting list that is a shame for all of us, I would hope, that at the moment stands at over 18,500 households waiting for a decent place to live. And that's simply not good enough, and there's no reason for it. I'm really proud also of the tangata whenua-led leadership throughout all of our plan, throughout all along the housing provision challenges, right from tangata whenua and iwi and hapu Māori organisation leadership in building homes to own for their own whānau, building homes to rent, leading community development, including making it easier to build papa kāinga on whenua Māori, also including a tangata whenua-led response to homelessness. So iwi and tangata whenua leadership right throughout the whole spectrum of housing provision. And that is because Māori are disproportionately represented in all of the unstable, low quality, bad impact housing situations that we have got today. And so it is only right that tangata whenua be allowed to lead on those solutions as well. We know best what our people need, and that we shouldn't be surprised that Māori are disproportionately represented in those issues, because we were left without land, and generations later that is still impacting on us. Our land was stolen and taken, and so generations later we're still reeling from that. I mentioned papa kāinga, but we also want to think outside the box when it comes to community and co-housing as well, especially in ways, thinking about ways to better use land. And you'll just have to forgive, my mokopuna is making lots of noise out in the hallway, and I hope she's not interrupting too much. So apologies, probably interrupting my sense of concentration the most. And some of the last sort of final points that I think might be worth mentioning, we want to fix the building code to make sure that, for example, all new builds are accessible, that we have a high quality of homes being built, that there is a comprehensive warrant of fitness, so that people who rent for rental homes, so that people who rent do not need to worry about whether their home is safe and healthy. And we want to expand the insulation program as well, to make sure that people's homes are warm and dry. We want to make things fairer for renters and regulate landlords and property managers better. And we want to expand progressive home ownership. I talked about tangata whenua building homes for rent-to-own type projects and schemes, but we want to expand progressive home ownership in general for people who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford a home. So that's just a quick overview of some of the issues we're facing and some of the solutions, in how to address those, some of the most significant problems and challenges that people face. And now I will start bringing our panelists on, who I'm really, really pleased. And I want, their voice to be the most dominant tonight, who will come and share with us their stories and their work and their lived experience, on what they know also needs to happen for us to all make sure that we live in decent housing. So, just very quickly, please, everyone, welcome Rob Smith. No mai, haere mai.
We good?
You good? Go for it.
Marama, thank you for making this space for us and setting the platform for what we're about to discuss tonight. Ko e hau, puanga tōro te maunga, puna ki te re ta awa, hoki anga whakapau karaki te moana, ngā pui te iwi, ngā toki mata whaurua te waka. Ko Rob Smith a hau, kai mahi ki te pautuatahi o Tamaki, peer support worker. I work in Tamaki for Housing First as a peer support worker. I come with a background of former homelessness and being able to share my insights in my mahi around the homeless sector. I'm based here in Tamaki, and yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora, Rob. Please go ahead and actually just spend a bit more time picking up on some of the main sort of observations you have, some of the celebrations and the ways of working that you've discovered through the work that you do, and anything else that you think would be our listeners tonight would really benefit from around having a good place to live.
So my mahi is based around sharing my lived experience around homelessness and addressing some of the stops and things around that. I suppose one of the basic things for Housing First is housing is basic human right, and we understand that, and should not be just a luxury. Needs to be made statute, but just looking at the obstacles and addressing those obstacles that face our homeless whānau, understanding where they come from and the supports that they need. Oh, gosh.
You keep, while you're thinking, Rob, thank you, ka pai. That's a really great sort of platform for us to keep launching off. Please, there'll be some questions too, I think, that will come through. And what I'll do now is, if I could please bring in Robert Whitaker, and then we'll have all of our panelists join together. Kia ora, Robert. No mai, haere mai.
Kia ora, everyone. I hope you can see me all right. My name's Robert Whitaker. I live down here in Wellington in my rental house that you can see behind me. I'm originally from Aotearoa, but I've lived in Wellington for many years, apart from a few years living in London on my OE a few years ago. Now, I've got 3 daughters who I live with, and my wife, and yeah, we're sort of, I guess you'd say, like an ordinary Wellington renting family who've never quite been able to afford to get into home ownership. About 5 years ago, I was involved in starting an organisation that's mainly based in Wellington here called Renters United. We are a campaigning organisation, and our focus really is on improving the quality of rental houses and the rights of renters in general. So yeah, we started in 2015. That's sort of 2 or 3 election cycles ago now. And I guess just to talk a little bit about our work and what we think about renting, it's probably worth talking a bit about this document, which I can hold up here, called the Plan to Fix Renting, which we published 2 years ago. And this was the result of spending quite a long time, like about a year, consulting with renters and talking to renters and, stalls at festivals and all those sorts of things to find out what were the issues that renters faced. How could we kind of organize those things, and how could we make some positive policy suggestions about how those things could be fixed? The plan's in sort of 4 parts, which I think will sound quite familiar to most renters. So one section of it is about the quality of our houses, improving the quality of our houses, making sure they're warm and dry and safe. And it's fantastic that this last government in particular has taken quite a big strides in that area. It's certainly not perfect, and I think that the plan from the Greens includes some enhancements to that, but nevertheless we do actually have some proper comprehensive standards for, well, the last lot of standards were written in 1947, so that's quite a big step forward. Another section of it is about security of tenure and being able to stay in your home as long as you want to. And again, the government's made some changes in that area, although we'd obviously like to see those go a little further. But then the other 2 areas really, which I think, the plan the Greens have announced and we think should be the focus now is, one is around cost and around affordability and making sure that everyone's paying a rent that's fair, that they can afford. And then the second part of that is about enforcement. And actually, there's not really much point in having really great rules and regulations if those aren't actually properly enforced. And so again, as Marama mentioned, we still have a big gap in our system at the moment, which expects tenants to enforce the rules on behalf of the government. We're all expected to take our landlords to court, essentially, if they don't meet their obligations. And that obviously creates a situation where many people are unwilling to do that because of various reasons, which we can talk about later, I guess. But from our perspective, that's the other area that really needs to be addressed as well. So regulation around who can be a property manager and who can be a landlord is one aspect of that. Another aspect of that is making services like mediation and things much more available so that the problems get sorted out sooner. And another aspect of that is actually having more advocates out there for renters to access so that they can actually find out what their rights are and talk those through with people. So I guess I'll pause at that point, but I'm very keen to talk about all of this. It's like a really amazing opportunity to speak about this, and I'm looking forward to all the questions and stuff that come in as well and hearing what people think. Kapai.
Kia ora, kapai, Robert. Thank you. So a reminder again, we've got some great questions coming through already. But if people would like to keep putting questions into the comments as well. And we've got a wonderful support team who will help to sort of get those questions through to us. Just wanted to quickly respond to a couple of points that you've made, Robert. One of the first ones is I should acknowledge too, I think it's really important to acknowledge that the reason why the housing is a crisis we still have every year a shameful tens of thousands of children in particular who visit the hospital due to housing related diseases. That's absolutely shameful. And we have not yet made the laws. We've moved some good distance, as Robert said, in this government, and I'm really pleased about the minimum healthy standards, for example. But no, they're still not enforced properly, and they absolutely leave the burden of enforcement on the tenants' shoulders. And one of the reasons why it has been such a struggle to get some decent, basic housing framework in place is because Parliament has never been representative of what the country actually looks like when it comes to owning a home and renting a home. So out of, I think, 121 MPs, although that number has dwindled somewhat in the last few weeks, but overall 121 or so MPs, only 8 of us MPs do not own any property, and that includes me. So only 8 MPs. That is not representative of the country at all. Over half of the country live in rental accommodation. For Māori, it's well over 60%, and for Pacific Island, it's even higher than that. So the MPs are not representative of people of the country. But even worse than that is so many MPs, like nearly the majority of national MPs, but also Labour MPs, own multiple properties and have quite a massive property portfolio. And so, like, I'm talking +4 properties, but actually some MPs 10 plus. And so we're not representative of renters, but we're certainly not representative of how many New Zealanders are using houses as a way to build even more wealth. So the rules have not changed the way that they should have. We have allowed for houses to be used as a way to exploit low-income households and working-class households, to have people struggling to pay accommodation. That has resulted in, and I'm talking 4 decades of successive governments, actually, it has resulted in increasing homelessness, unhealthy homes, lower home ownership ability for most people, and so on and so forth. So that's, I thought, and you know, the thing is, while I am a renter, I am a privileged renter. You know, I am the sort of tenant that is not going to be moved on because I have the ability and the privilege to pay, and it's status that simply just comes from being an MP as well. And most people who rent aren't in the privileged position as a renter. And probably I'm much more capable of buying a house if I want to. I just don't want to right now. And I can get away with not having to right now as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, and thanks for reminding me of that, Robert. Okay, goodness, where are we? I've got some discussion points here. So, Rob, I thought I would start with you, because I know in your mahi, you are right at the front line of working with and supporting whānau who are on, including whānau who are on the public waiting list. Is that right? And I wondered if you could add your thoughts about our goal. You know, we want to clear the waiting list in 5 years. We want to commit to that. What would that mean for your work, for the whānau that you work with?
Well, we get people housed, but keeping them housed is hard due to the inadequacies of the Residential Tenancy Act, as Robert was going on. Clearing that waiting list. Oh, yeah. I suppose really stopping it right at the beginning, turning off that tap, stop the flow of youth into homelessness. That's where we're looking now. Also based around keeping people housed, putting more systems in place there to keep people in the house, and creating a safety net around what those people need in terms of keeping them in that sustainable housing, coming from a homeless perspective anyway.
Thank you, Rob. Can I pick up, I think it's a really relevant point that you raised about keeping people housed. Would you like to share with us what sort of support or changes, specific changes, you talked about the Residential Tenancies Act, what sort of specific changes do you see would make a real difference to helping to keep people housed?
In terms of that tenancy, it's probably giving the people more rights, giving them more voice in terms of how things work out. The right supports in place for them to meet those. I mean, it's quite a journey and quite a task, and having the right people in place, the right supports, the right systems. I suppose what we're dealing is reducing that power that Body Corp has over our tenancies, especially for our marginalised whānau, our homeless whānau. They don't meet that tenancy mark that they set. So I suppose that works around the tenancy rights, that vetting. Oh gosh.
No, Kapai, thank you. I'm hearing, and I'm sort of thinking about our plan. I'm hearing a lot about the need for wraparound support to help whānau, which is exactly the work that people like yourself do. Wraparound support to help whānau through that journey of maintaining a tenancy, maintaining a property. What we've talked about in our plan is putting more resource towards exactly that support that people like yourself provide, helping people on the journey of, because I understand, and I've heard from you, how hard it can be for people to go from unstable housing, precarious housing situations for perhaps most of their lives, perhaps generations, through to holding down a tenancy, holding down a property, and coming up against that power imbalance. Like, I know that there are people who would rather not complain about crappy housing because they're scared of losing that place. They're scared that there might not be something else out there. So thank you, Rob. I'm now going to go to Robert, and I believe you've probably got some insight to add, whether it's about renting more broader or specific to clearing the waiting list as well.
Yeah, well, I think that one issue we have at the moment is that the private rental sector has too much of the market. It's essentially become the like housing form of default if you can't afford to buy a house, but also, if there's no state house for you or like council house or whatever, you're in the private rental market almost by default if you're not homeless. And so what that means is, and you often hear landlords say, oh, we're not a social service, we're trying to make a profit here. And actually, like, there's some truth to that. They shouldn't really be a social service. We shouldn't be expecting private landlords to provide the kind of wraparound services that you talked about. So I think that clearing the waiting list is like, in my opinion, the minimum the government should be doing. Like, there shouldn't be, especially because that waiting list, the criteria to get on that waiting list are quite high, and in years gone by, there was much lower criteria than that to get onto the waiting list for public housing, and it was much more broadly available than it's currently sort of specified at. So I think that what we definitely need to do is broaden out the types of housing that are out there. You talked about involving Māori, you talked about involving community organisations and councils and various people, and I really think that's really absolutely critical. We need to massively increase the amount of supply, and we particularly need to increase the amount of supply that isn't in the private investor market. But even in the private investor market, we also need to think about how we, over time, change the style of investment that's going on. That in most countries where there is big private investment markets that are functional rather than dysfunctional, the investors are largely, big pension funds and long-term investors who are looking for a long-term return on an asset purchase where they're buying the asset, outright. They're not immediately mortgaging and leveraging themselves. Yeah. And so, we have to think about ways to address that as well, and think about, the fact that we do still keep property as an untaxed asset class compared to any other form of kind of investment, which is another problem that we have in our system as well. So I really think that this has to be tackled in a lot of ways, and I really want to think about the supply side of it, but also I do want to just also say that anything we do to solve the supply side has a big time lag about it. It takes a long time for that supply to start to bring rents down in the private sector, for example. So even if the government builds more state houses, a lot more state houses, and they're already trying to build more, and your plan is to build even more, and that's fantastic. But it's still going to take years for that effect to sort of flow on to people in the private rental market. And in the meantime, where our rents will stay as high as they are, I don't really believe that the recession is going to make a massive adjustment down. I think we might lose, on average 5 or 10% or something like that, but it's not going to crash rents. which is, again, because the economy has been well insulated by choices the government's made. So that's not necessarily, a bad thing, because that means people, maybe incomes aren't going to drop as much as they could have. But, landlords will want their share of those incomes, and they'll want, and, I think in your plan as well, you mentioned the accommodation supplement, and the accommodation supplement is $2 billion of government money a year that's going straight to private landlords to basically make up the difference between those incomes and the rents. And so the government's already spending a lot on maintaining the system as it is, and that needs to change, and we need to invest that money in actually changing the system.
Ka pai. Thank you, Robert. I think that's a good segue on one particular question. I might start on some of our questions now, but there's one that is very relevant to what we've all just been discussing from Miriama Buchanan, who says, are you saying Greens would be relying on local government to create housing opportunities for whānau? We think that councils would want to do quite a bit more, but as Robert said, there's an opportunity for councils to be able to do more. Community housing providers, absolutely, who have already shown that they know how to do this, that they have got the relationships with their communities and networks. They understand the different needs and can build to the different needs. They also have worked out how to have the relationships with the financial sector and banks and so on and so forth. Obviously, I also talked about tangata whenua, Māori housing organisations, and so on and so forth. So it's a real focus on people-led, community-centred, not-for-profit housing approach. And as we also pointed out, the government will still have a massive role to play in straight kāinga order housing as well, in public and state housing. So it's going to be addressed, that housing supply, as Robert has said, will need to be addressed by several different players and in different ways that are appropriate to the different needs of the different communities. It won't just be led by one particular sector. And all of that will mean less reliance on the private rental market. But Robert is pointing out that we need to also move our cultural thinking of housing as the big nest egg builder and think about more productive ways for people to invest their money in, that isn't just about a house, being the big wealth builder. And I also understand the time lag, so none of this will happen fast enough, none of it. And as fast as I want it to happen, and as fast as we will hopefully help it happen, right now at this very moment, there are people living in unnecessary hardship. So alongside the housing, we have also put up our poverty action plan to lift incomes for the lowest. When we put up our poverty action plan, we knew how essential it was to also try and fix housing, because we don't want extra financial assistance just being immediately chewed up by increasing housing costs and increasing rents. And that's why it's so crucial to address both income, including employment and wages, and lifting, living wage. So it's important to address income as well as housing across the full spectrum. And I do think it's not included in our plan, but I am really glad and want to engage in the conversation about what further controls we can have on rents. And that may include some sort of limit on the percentage increase that could happen. We've so far in legislation prevented rent increases, limited rent increases to once a year, but I'm aware that what might happen is that rent could be increased a hell of a lot just once a year. So I am interested in how we can put some sort of controls, especially in the meantime, on actual amount of rent increases in well. Okay, I wondered now if you were comfortable, Rob, I thought that it would be really good for us to hear more about the actual lived experiences and tangata whenua-led responses of homelessness, whether you're comfortable sharing that from any perspective, perhaps including the whānau that you work with, the people that you work with, and or your own, and talking about that lived experience of homelessness, and perhaps the journey through to getting people into shelter, into a home as well.
Yeah, kia ora marama. Sure. Some of the barriers that were in place, you really had to be actually going homelessness to actually get any support. Why things were dragged out to a point where you had to go to that extreme and not really having those services in place. Some of those systemic barriers were making it really hard to get through once to access the support you needed. Were some of my learnings there. Just trying to get hold of the basics, from emergency housing to just trying to get some ID so I can start really taking steps into housing. Oh gosh.
No, Kate Pai, that's perfect. You mentioned about, for example, access to support. And I know that, for example, work and income, that it's been hard for people to just get basic help and social safety net support. And I wondered if you just wanted to, because that was part of our poverty action plan, was not just about increasing incomes. It was a whole comprehensive plan, but it was actually about making our social safety net about kindness and support rather than punishment, rather than holding back as much support as possible. So I just wondered if you wanted to share a little bit more about that particular barrier.
Housing is a basic human right. I suppose my first night here out on Auckland streets, it was, I knew there were supports here that could help me. But I arrived midwinter, 8 o'clock at night, had no idea where the supports were, who to talk to, or where anything was located. But from my story, I think the biggest help for me were the homeless whānau, and their support. They operate on a whole system of whanaungatanga, manaakitanga, aroha for each other. You have no house, I have no house, therefore we're the same. They guided me to the services that I needed to go to. So they introduced me to Auckland City Mission, LifeWise. It was through them I learnt how to look after people, from people that had nothing. They knew how to survive. And for a new guy walking in off the street into the biggest city in Tamaki in Auckland, New Zealand, but to be only approached by the homeless whānau, that was something. And their support helped me navigate through the system, find out where all the shelters were, and thus start me on my journey where I had to. Once in those spaces, I was able to get the information that I needed to keep traveling on my journey out of homelessness. And that's there. Yeah, I'd probably have to say, in terms of my story, it was the homeless whānau that got me off the street. I'm really fortunate now to be in a place where I can give back to them and support them over what I have learned through my journey from the streets into housing, and now working in a mahi that gives back to them.
Beautiful. That's just beautiful. And I think is the role model of where I would like to see our entire country get that same level of understanding about manaaki and aroha and helping each other, making sure no one's missing out. And that now, Rob, you are part of that leadership work. And I'm feeling incredibly grateful that we have got you here to be able to share that insight and share that story. That's expertise. That's expertise that no politician has. That's expertise that people in power don't have. That's expertise that needs to lead us through the dark into the light. So thank you, Rob, for sharing that with us. Robert, I wondered if you wanted to pick up, well, on anything that you might be sort of triggering some thoughts for you. We've still got some more. Did you want to go into, well, anything that you might have? I know you've got a particular focus on renting, but did you want to go into sort of some broader levers and solutions that you've been thinking about that you see as a key way through the broader issues as well?
Yeah, I think, well, just, I mean, thanks to Rob for sharing his story. It's so interesting and, as you say, inspiring as well, I guess. But I do think that concept of community as well is something that's absent, like, right across our housing system. Like, it's kind of like, for me, thinking about renting in particular, renting is a very fragile existence. I'm in a pretty privileged position like you, Marama, in terms of, I've got a decent income and stuff like that, and my landlord knows that I'm a renters advocate, so he's probably not going to evict me anytime soon. But for all renters, they do live under that shadow of, like, having to move on and not really being, and there is an aspect of engaging with your community that suffers as a consequence of that you don't get to know your neighbors as deeply as well as you do if you might own your home, that you may not get as involved in the local school or the local church or whatever it is, whatever community activities you might be doing, because you might be moving. And I know in Auckland and in Wellington particularly, but other places in the country as well, like, the next house you find might be very far away. You might be moving the kids to school, you might be moving very far away. So it's very, very hard to establish those kind of community roots and sort of build communities with that sort of thing going on. And so I think that a part of these many solutions that you've raised, like, or the ideas of, getting different people involved in building housing and running housing, is an aspect of getting community ownership of various types going. So I think in your document you mentioned, housing associations and things like that, as well as tangata whenua. And I do think that there's, for me, there's something in, and I'm not sure that I'm even the right person to suggest the sort of shape that this should take, but the involving Māori more and involving that sort of invoking the kind of partnership aspect of treaty, the collaborative aspect of the treaty is really important here as well, to kind of establish those kind of communities in the long term that are sort of bicultural and multicultural. And housing is the base of that. That's where people live. That's the communities that they're in. That's the sort of built environment that those communities exist within. And it's not just about the design first up, but it's about the sort of long-term relationship between people. And I just want to say as well, like, there's there is a sort of a careful path to tread here as well, that we don't create a whole lot of affordable housing that's sort of essentially like a windfall for the first person that buys it or moves into it, and then after that it ceases to be affordable the next time it's sold. So I think that some of the models that are being talked about do embed that sort of affordability in the long term, and that's where, again, where the kind of community cohesion stuff comes in as well, that communities actually maintain that affordability and maintain that diversity in the long term as well, rather than it being discounted development once, and then people sell it 3 years later for a tidy profit in their back pocket, and that affordability is lost. And I know that communities like Aotearoa and stuff are being they've been looked at for these redevelopments, and actually I think those communities are concerned that some of that community that they've built there will be lost in those redevelopments, as it has happened in Auckland, and the kind of that is something that has to be thought about here as well. It's not just about building more houses; it's also about building communities around those houses and in those houses.
Kia ora. I'm really pleased you've focused some attention on that aspect of, this is about building communities, not just building houses, and that this is about communities leaving that development. Communities leading with how do they see their community. And because I was literally on the front lines at Glen Innes, I was literally there with the community trying to resist the police and the big trucks, taking those homes out of that community, the community who felt like they had no voice, who felt like they were not a part of that at all, who were also protesting the Crown selling off public land to private profit-making developers. They were also protesting that, and I always acknowledge Whaia Nikki Roti, who stayed in her house as a protest. She was right. In our plan, we've said that the Crown should maintain the same level of public ownership of lands, should not be relying on private developers to build back public housing, that we would change the way that, because this government still does it that way as well. There's still this model of a third of the Crown land, remove the state houses, and a third of that land goes to private developers to fund the build back. We're saying, no, keep the land and put more Crown funds and kainga ora funds into keeping the land and rebuilding homes back properly and using the land better. But what happened in Glen Innes is house prices for those private homes actually moved a lot of people out of the community, became incredibly unaffordable, took all of the best land, the stuff down by the water, and that was all taken. That was the stuff that resulted in over, $1.5 to $2 million homes, with the best views and the best spots, and that was never going to be for the community. That was, so I continue to stand against that development and instead have development that has the people leading the vision for how they would like to see their community rebuilt. And we're very clear that we want to see good green spaces connected to public transport, being able to do higher density well. And it can be done well. It needs to be done well. Higher density done well is going to be a part of our solution, because we've only got a bit of soil, good soil left, and we don't want to steal that away. We actually want to protect the bit of fertile land and waterways and native reserves and native bush, etc. So we're going to have to do higher density well, and we can. There are models to be able to do that. So yes, people have probably picked up that for 100 years or whatever, we just put houses on bits of land, and that was it. We didn't even think about transport. We didn't even think about motorways and connecting places properly. We just plonked houses on land, and that there was not much thinking beside that. So we're really, part of our plan is to change that. Oh, okay, there's some more questions that I might pick up on in here. Some of them are policy ones. I think this is a good one, and I would be interested in Rob and Robert. James Landers has asked, I would like to know about housing the people like me who need to be in semi-supported care. Yes, absolutely. All of traditionally our houses were built for non-disabled people, for example, and were all designed with in a way that was exclusive to many people. And we're very clear that all new government builds and all new buildings, and particularly kainga ora, all of them should be accessible. That universally, the way that we should be building is that every house is accessible by universal design, so that we don't have to builds that actually right from the get-go, every house is accessible, for example. And I don't know if that's the full sort of scope of that, what that question is asking, but as a minimum, we would like to see every house accessible universally. And in terms of supported care, I just wanted to, for the Housing First type programs that we know work, our plan includes a whole lot more support to increase that around the country. We know now that the government has supported Māori-led and tangata whenua-led housing first type programs, absolutely marvelous. We know that will need to continue. We want to ramp up the funding for the work that you do, Rob, actually, the mahi that you do. We know that we need more and more of it, and will for quite some time while we fix housing, so that we can stop, as you said, Rob, I think, turn the tap off. So we know that for quite some time we will need that ongoing support. So Rob, first, did you have anything further to add in terms of sort of that supported housing, supported living, supported care, and how important you have seen that be for many whānau?
Yeah, I think that's one of the main functions of what we do when working with our whānau, our homeless whānau. And I suppose starting at the start, or just changing the language around it, they're not clients, they're people. So we call them whānau, addressing them in this manner. But yes, for us, it's about building that relationship first, and getting that buy-in from them so we can start meeting some of those needs. Yeah. And of course, it needs to be for as long as they need it.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
that's what we're talking about here in terms of really providing that wraparound support that is easily accessible, that meets the need, and will go on for as long as they need it until they can maintain, sustain, and be housed. I mean, a house should be a home, not a commodity. It's their home, and it's really around supporting them to do that.
Beautiful, because I guess we can't make that assumption, Rob, that it is suitable for everyone to live in a house, as most of us are doing, that there are other ways of living, including supported living, that we need to remember, and that we may always require that type of living as well. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
It's looking at communal living. That's one of the learnings that we've learned from our whānau on the street. They run in that space of whānau, and communal living on the street is about supporting each other, reflecting, and finding ways we can be creative around those spaces as well, for our whānau in terms of the support they need to actually maintain that tenancy. So really looking at those issues of what a shared accommodation, what that would look like for them, and putting that support in, and addressing some of those systemic barriers that we face to meet our homeless population and our homeless whānau's needs.
Beautiful. Thank you. Robert, did you have any thoughts on that in particular, that sort of supported care, different ways of living, different models of living in community as well?
Yeah, I think we need to let those sort of models bloom, really. We need a lot more of, we need a lot more of different options for ways people living. We need to sort of, as you said, our housing system was mostly about plonking houses down on sections for nuclear families to live in, Pākehā nuclear families, actually, to extend that even further. And we are at the start, I think, of a transformation, and or a broadening out, I suppose, of how we sort of organize, different ways of living that suit lots of different people. And there's co-housing movements, and there's tiny houses, many other sort of things around those. What I did want to talk a little bit about, just because I have in the past spoken with people from sort of disability sector about accessible and inclusive housing, as well, as that we do have to remember that, again, the solution of building more accessible state houses is a huge part of the solution, but we need accessible houses now as well, and we need to think about what that means for people living in the private rental sector. And I live in Wellington. There are not a huge number of flat sections in Wellington, and there are not a huge number, and even those houses on flat sections often have steps and all these kind of things. And the recent changes to the RTA, the Residential Tenancies Act, will make a little bit of a difference there, because it does actually permit like accessible modifications to rental houses, and does make a little difference there. But I think a lot more support, and I'm not somebody who can speak to in detail about all the barriers they face, but I do know that people trying to modify their homes for disability things have a lot of barriers they face. And what I have heard in the past is that you can get, for example, some money from MSD to modify your house, but it's sort of like a one-time thing. And obviously, if you're in the rental sector, you might need to be modifying your house every year if you're having to move every year. So, so some attention as well on what people need now in the houses they're in, as well as the houses that we're going to build in the future, is really important, I think.
Thank you, Robert, for putting that in front of my attention as well, because that's something that we haven't specifically picked up in our homes plan. But I think that that's something, for example, that we could pick up in our poverty action plan as well, and our support plan. So thank you for raising that with me directly. I'm aware that we are just coming up to our sort of 8:30 close, which I will try and do my best to honour, because I know people are busy, as well as our panelists. There's a couple of quick questions here that I think might be worth picking up. One thing is, in terms of our plan, how will it get funded? So our plan, the whole thing, our plan to build more public homes, kainga ora homes, to support community housing providers, to build homes to rent, and also progressive home ownership. Our plan to add more resourcing into programs like Housing First for ending homelessness. Our plan to make sure that landlords register and that property managers obtain a license. All of the papakainga planning, accessing finance, so on and so forth. All of the plan is costed by, some of it is reallocating KiwiBuild funding. So I've been very clear that we should have been focusing on public and affordable community housing rather than private market housing. And so I think that we've decided that we can use the funds that were up for KiwiBuild better, and should reprioritise that into public housing, emergency housing, so on and so forth. Then that's sort of for like the capital costs. Then for the annual costs, things like the homelessness plan, the license and the registration, is a 250 million annual cost. And some of that comes from our wealth and income tax, so redistributing funds. And some of that will also be about reprioritising funds as well. But I think one thing is very, very clear. Housing is one of the most important things that we can invest and spend on and do with our resources. It's one of the most fundamental things we should be doing with our resources, is making sure that everyone has a home, that we get that right, and a whole lot of other good things will come. So I've got absolutely no qualms that we've got what we need. We've got what we need. It's about focusing and prioritizing our resources into better areas. And then, I think this is a good question. We don't all know what papakainga is, and to be honest, I am still learning, and Māori and iwi are still reclaiming what papakainga even is, because we haven't been able to practice it for 200 years because our land was removed. So papakainga, my very early understanding, papakainga is not just about building, it's also about community living, but it's also about reconnecting descendants back to their whenua. So it's a relationship with the land itself and with the whenua itself. It's not just about putting buildings on land, it's reconnecting whānau to their ancestral whenua and to each other. And it relies on a way of living together in a community type setting on papakainga, where everyone has responsibilities and accountabilities to each other, and it requires working together to live together as well. And so papakainga offer us a really awesome blueprint of, moving away from just plonking houses of an individualistic whānau type model that we've all had to withstand for all these years, and returning to a supported way, a community way of living, a way of using our land better and sharing spaces better as well. And I would love to live on a papakainga. And it's also about building houses and building communities in a way that reduces our costs for whānau, better energy, lower power costs, better insulated, reducing our climate emissions in the way that we build houses and both the materials and the way that we use energy. So it's the whole deal. It's the whole deal of how we design and create communities. Let's see. Oh, there's some stuff about uhumatao. Tane asks, when will uhumatao be returned? I hope that we will see an enduring solution shortly after election, probably. And I know that the only solution that will be achieved is one where mana whenua are happy with it. So I'm really pleased about that. I'm really, really pleased that that is going to happen. And then how is the Green Party supporting whānau to build papakainga in Māngere and Manurewa? So how we are proposing to support building papakainga is two specific ways. We want to, at the moment, there's like a Māori housing unit and here in different places. There's one in TPK, you know, and we want to pull that all together and have one sort of cross-agency Māori housing development unit that facilitates whānau to be able to get through all of the big barriers and the tough planning rules and consents and so on and so forth, and have a unit that is dedicated to hand-holding whānau through that really convoluted process, but also and help whānau navigate that process for building papakainga, but also making the finance tools available much better. There's this thing called, I think it's a kāinga whenua loan that's run by the bank, and really it was supposed to help funding for building papakainga, but really all it is it's a Pākehā loan package with a Māori name. So it's still the same difficulty to try and use, and because of that, it hasn't been used very well. So we want to review the funding, the financing tools, and make them actually workable so that iwi and hapu can start building papakainga. Okay, we're over. So what I'm going to do now is pass to you, Rob, first, and you, Robert, second, for some final thoughts and that whatever you've got in terms of final thoughts, next steps, what you think might be important to leave us with tonight. From anything that you might have shared or might have thought up tonight. So I'll hand over to you firstly, Rob.
Oh, geez, free reign.
Yes.
I suppose one thought in my mahi is based around homelessness and the barriers we have in terms of really creating that pathway for our homeless whānau. I suppose the major thought that I had was we need to accept as a society in Aotearoa that homelessness for our Indigenous people is a consequence of intergenerational trauma created as a consequence of colonization. To go forward, we need to decolonize, deconstruct, re-establish our systems in the true protection and partnership of the treaty. So, kia ora, and that's me.
Kia ora, Rob. Beautiful. Over to you, Robert.
Yeah, I guess I just want to reflect on the fact that that there's an opportunity here for some solidarity and unity as well. That it's about people across New Zealand, all kinds of people coming together. And what Rob just said about decolonizing, that's a process for everybody that everybody needs to engage with. And our messed up property market is just one manifestation of that history that we all share that we need to sort out. So yeah, Rob's words are really inspiring, really on the nail for me. So yeah, and I as renters, we're trying to sort of organize ourselves a bit and trying to get that voice out there, and hopefully we end up with a few more renters in Parliament as well, maybe after this election, we'll see. But certainly we want to make our voice heard in Parliament and everywhere else, so that the conversations about property ownership in New Zealand aren't solely about who's getting the best yields out of such and such a suburb this fortnight, which is, so much of the discourse around property in this country is sort of driven by that investor model. So we really want to change that.
Kia ora, Robert. I too really just want to rest on your words, Rob, about all of us recovering from colonization, actually all of us. And for me, that's about rehumanizing the way our rules and our systems are set up, rehumanizing each other and reconnecting across communities. And I think that sums it up perfectly. So kia ora kōrua, kia ora tātou, kia ora koutou, people who joined us. Thank you so much. Really appreciated talking about the visions and what we can achieve supporting each other. And now I would like to close us off with a karakia. Before that, I'd like to ask our panelists, please, if you could stay on after our karakia, and pōmari to everybody else. And our closing karakia, tūtawa mai I runga, tūtawa mai I raro, tūtawa mai I roto, tūtawa mai I waho. Kia tau wai, te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Come forth from above, come forth from below, come forth from within and from the environment, vitality and well-being for all, strengthened in unity. Pōmari e, thank you everybody. Kia ora.